Black jails are literally everywhere in China, literally everywhere. They can be in any shape or form.
The shocking story of an American citizen who was secretly jailed and tortured in China.
They're kicking and punching me, my legs, my back, my arms.
And hauled from one black jail to another.
We're talking about a society that operates under this penumbra of terror.
In this episode, I sit down with Warren Rothman, a Yale graduate who was once a lawyer at an elite law firm in China, before a shocking turn of events made sure he'd never return. He's the author of Kafka in China, the People's Republic of Corruption.
Even a foreigner with a passport and a visa goes in there and may not get out. He really has only a conditional permit to get out.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick. Warren Rothman, such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Thank you, Jan, for asking me on your show.
So Warren, in 2008, you had, I think, what can only be described as a horrific experience in communist China. Before we go there, I want to kind of give our audiences a bit of a sense of how you got to China, what you were thinking about China as you entered as a corporate lawyer and so forth. And eventually how we got to this 2008 moment.
I was a lawyer in China. I had worked for a major law firm, a New York law firm in Beijing. In Shanghai, I worked for a European law firm, and then I went on my own. But I had been studying China and its history since college days. My first teachers were fabulous, and they just inspired a great love of this subject in me. And they brought me into studying Chinese as a language when there were 2 people in the language class. No one was studying Chinese in the 1960s, but I loved it and I couldn't get enough of it. And so when opportunities opened up to work in China and a major Wall Street law firm called upon me to be part of their Beijing office, I was delighted, and of course I accepted. I had kept up my Chinese and I worked on it very hard, and so it was pretty fluent by the time I moved to Beijing in 2000. Work there was interesting. It seemed to be part of an environment that was rapidly changing for the better. In the early 2000s, I think there was some hope that China was going to be approaching some notion of a rule-based system and a concept of abiding by rules. I was under no illusion that China was anything like a rule of law society, and that it would be a tremendously long haul before China would ever become anything like a rule of law society. Some people had starry eyes about China. I did not. I was absolutely shocked when China was given WTO membership with making practically no concessions. It was just a gift from the US government, you could say, a very bad gift. There was a sense, though, that the regime wanted to have an international face and genuinely wanted to have international cooperation and to grow this enormous country's economy, which is so backward. It was clear that they needed everything they could get, and they got it via WTO, via all the investment that was poured into China. As far as my living in China, I absolutely loved it. I had many Chinese friends. I had foreign friends, but I had more Chinese friends than foreigners. I loved getting together with them, getting to know their families. And the thing about China in the 2000s was, unlike the 1980s or 90s, when you would go there and beg to get into a ministry and wait outside in the cold in a booth before they'd even let you go in, this was a much more open in terms of access to officials, even on a social basis. You could go to people's homes, which is inconceivable in the past. People had telephones, they were starting to get internet. This seemed like a society that had a potential for a positive change.
We're in a situation right now where, ostensibly in retaliation to the arrest of the Huawei CFO, 2 Canadians have been incarcerated in some kind of Chinese Communist Party prison for over 3 years. Let's talk about your personal story here. Give us a picture of what happened in 2008.
In 2008, May 2008, I was sitting across the table in a restaurant from a Chinese colleague of mine, a gentleman whom I had hired for moonlighting for me when I was working on my own. He was worked for a Western law firm, very, very smart, terrific paralegal, absolutely magnificent at translating documents. I thought it's really tremendous future for this guy. And we're sitting at this restaurant, and all of a sudden he said, "Hey, Warren, guess what? I got my deal through. We got it through. We paid a bribe. We paid a bribe." This guy, who was a very talented paralegal, blurts out that he has arranged a $3 million bribe to get a deal through for an American company. I was shocked to hear that from this guy, because I thought this guy really was a stand-up guy. I thought he was really the kind of person that could lead China to a better future. Someone who was aware of Western culture and aware of Chinese culture and aware of all the issues between the two. Someone extraordinarily talented. So it was a tremendous disappointment to me to hear this. I felt I had contributed to a career of his in a way by hiring him. I berated him for at least an hour, and I told him it was the most disgusting thing I'd ever heard. I told him, "Tao Yan, disgusting. This is not the way China should develop. It won't develop this way. You can't live on bribes. You can't do this. This is not the right thing. This is not the way Western law firms practice. This is a disgrace to the practice of law." Well, I went on and on and on, and he's shuffling around, trying not to look at me. We leave, and I had been scheduled to leave the next day or so for the US, so I leave. And I don't come back till October because of the Beijing Olympics. I wanted to avoid all the tumult of people going to and from Beijing and traveling around China. So I returned in October, but it turned out that was in the middle of the financial crisis, the great financial crisis of 2008, absolutely dead center in it. Everything was tanking right down to the bottom. It was an unbelievable situation. People had never imagined this could happen to our markets. There I go, I say to myself, well, I haven't been there for 5 months. I really miss being in China. I really loved being in China. I felt a lack, a personal, something missing in my life if I hadn't been in China recently. So I went back, knowing there was really very little work to do. Everything had frozen solid. Nothing, no business was being done. Practically no banking was being done. So I was there just to kind of check out things, live a kind of casual time, see if there might be any business opportunities, but mostly there just to be there for a month. So I come back from an early walk in a park, a dawn walk in the park, 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. My apartment is completely trashed, completely wrecked from top to bottom. Papers all over the place, files thrown all over the place, books thrown all over the place, CDs, DVDs. I mean, the place was really terrible. I sit there for a while trying to figure out what's going on here. Why did this happen? Suddenly my housekeeper comes back, and I see her around a corner spying around things, and she notices this bag I had packed, ready to flee actually. She inspects all that and sees what's in there, and snooping around all over, doesn't look a bit surprised at the state of affairs that she was supposedly keeping house for.
Well, so let me back up just a sec. So why did you pack a bag so quickly?
Because I really felt terror, a sense of instant terror.
And why would you?
Well, just because I wanted to get out of there. I didn't know what had happened. I'd never seen such a sight. And I knew immediately something terrible was going on. You're living in an environment where no matter how things may be progressing positively, you know that the basic environment is one operated by terror. You know that terrible things are done to people. So when I saw this, I was really very, very frightened.
You were still happy to work there, irrespective.
Well, I thought things might be improving. For example, the issue of what was happening to members of Falun Gong was not well known. We knew about the prayer meeting outside of Zhongnanhai. We knew that the regime had reacted violently to that, but I don't think anyone in my position had a sense of the scope of Falun Gong or the horrific things that actually were being carried out on Falun Gong. I mean, the Chinese have put an industrial scale operation of so-called organ harvesting, which I call organ pillaging, ripping organs out of live people to sell them on a market. I mean, Dr. Mengele never dreamed of such a thing. And yet here it is in China, communist China, always communist China, on an industrial scale. But we did not know that then. I didn't, certainly not.
I see.
So with that idea, I don't know if I could have stayed a day. I don't actually know if I could have stayed there.
You, at this point, you sought out basically, friends or some people that you could count on.
Yes.
At this point, and so tell me how that went and who you found. And
okay, I didn't have many close friends in Shanghai, and all the friends I had were just gone there. No one was there during the financial crisis, none of the foreign lawyers that I knew. And but I had a lot of Chinese friends in Beijing. And as the situation started to gather terror, indeed after the first attack the same evening of that apartment, the group of 12 thugs showed up at my door. I decided to call some friends in Beijing and see what they could advise me to do. And I called my best friend there, a Chinese entrepreneur whom I respected greatly. He was a wonderful guy. And he immediately volunteered to come to Beijing. But he was headed off in an elaborate pattern by Mr. Q.
And this was the gentleman that you had basically told off earlier.
Yes.
About this bribe, but this isn't what you were thinking about. You were looking for a helping hand at this
Well,
point.
indeed, I wasn't asking Q for that help. I was asking someone in Beijing, someone who I referred to as Lin. So at one point, I'm talking to Lin, and Q actually grabs the phone right out of my hand, because he is fluent English. He can absolutely hear what I'm saying to Lin about what's happening. And he grabs the phone out of my hand and races out to the terrace and talks to him in something. And I gather that what he's saying to him is that really everything's okay. And maybe Warren had a fit of some kind, threw his own apartment around. I don't know what he told him, but at any rate, Lin did not come. The long and the short of it is that there I am with Q coming out of my apartment, and I'm waiting in my mind to see what the next shoe is to drop, whether I really better get out of there. I'm going back and forth all the time in my mind as to whether I really have to go. But the problem of leaving is that if I left, there I leave this trashed apartment, and who's going to explain that? Only to my detriment, obviously. So I felt I'd leave my whole reputation, along with my whole career, behind. So it was very hard to think of leaving, but my first instinct was indeed to flee.
So at this point, this gentleman Q wants to help you.
Well, he's appearing in the guise of someone who's being sympathetic and helpful, and even an intermediary with the IE whom he hadn't met, because he did some of his work at my apartment when he worked for me. So he knew the IE, and he was giving me stories about the IE being very upset about the way I yelled at her when I found her snooping around my apartment in the trash and all that. And so he was kind of defending her, and also at the same time providing things that she would ordinarily provide, such as food, sort of keeping me in place in a way. That night, the second night of this ordeal, a gang of nearly 15 thugs showed up. A bigger gang, a nastier gang, yelling ferocious insults at me in Chinese, which I answered in good Chinese as well, in Mandarin, not Shanghainese. But at any rate, that was not like me at all. That behavior was not at all typical of me. I'm not one to confront a gang of really ugly thugs. And, but some sort of instinct, some desire for evidence prompted me to, well, I saw these caps on the heads of these men, and 3 of them had these caps with gold eagle insignia. And I thought, that really doesn't look good. So I grabbed 2 of the caps and skirt back into my apartment and slammed the door, and these thugs are just absolutely furious. They practically burst the door down. So I held on to the caps, and just incidentally, it turned out that these indeed were indications that these people were part of some kind of black gang, some real awful type of organized thugs. So after the second thug attack, I really decided to leave, and by the next morning I was just about out the door. I had really decided I can't stay here any longer. It's just too dangerous. And I was really racing to get out of my apartment, grabbing up the last things, throwing them, closing my suitcase, when Q breaks in with 4 thugs, wrestles me back into the apartment, these thugs, and Q starts ordering them to get everything ready, to prepare, to finish packing whatever I had packed, to leave aside whatever couldn't be fixed, fit in, and then these 4 thugs drag me physically out of the apartment. And then I'm taken downstairs in the elevator, put into an unmarked white van. Well, I'm driven around for hours. And finally it's nighttime. And I'm taken to what I've decided to call a 4-star black jail. This is the first of 4 black jails which I was privileged enough to see. This was a normal hotel room with people operating normally, a huge staff, and you would expect in a 4-star hotel, people delivering stuff, moving back and forth. But I'm forced to stay in this one room. I just get a glimpse of it, but it's a normal place. It's a 4-star hotel, absolutely normal. But it's made into a black jail for this purpose. Black jails are literally everywhere in China, literally everywhere. They can be in any shape or form. They can be in a basement. They can be behind a real jail. They can be, you know, in a real hotel like this. They can be in a disgusting little hotel, another type of black jail that I saw. They could be anywhere, but they are everywhere.
And just very briefly, you know, for the benefit of our audience, what's a black jail?
A black jail is an unofficial jail. It's off the books type of place where people who are it could be Falun Gong members, it could be other religious types, it could be Tibetans, it could be Uyghurs, it could be me, Warren Rothman, American citizen.
So you keep being shuffled from one black site from one of these black jails to another for some indiscernible reason.
Yes.
And then finally you end up in this place where they actually assault you and strap you to a rack of some sort.
The 4th black jail was the place where I was tortured very, very badly. I was tied up to a lattice work that was in the shape of a cross. And my arms were extended completely to each side. I was seated. The cross was pushed behind a chair, and my arms were yanked incredibly hard to the side. And this one thug came up and jammed dirt into my mouth, so I was barely able to breathe. And I really thought at this point that was the end of my life, right there. I was not accepting it, but I thought that was it.